Hello, nice to have you. All right. We're looking at test two, and I have marked off some of the questions that I definitely want to cover. Uh, but quite a few of them actually I have not marked off, but I give you the option today to ask me questions about them for the simple reason that the answers are found within the argumentative assignments themselves. And also, as I had mentioned, this being the second test, I wasn't going to go over to the same degree as I did test one. Okay, but nevertheless, I never say no to any specific questions that students ask me. Okay, as we're looking at this second test, so I'm going to share the screen if I can. All right, with this test, and number two, right off the bat, right, the Spanish-American War with revisionist historiography of that war, right, is you'll notice from the book, it more than suggests that there were domestic issues going on and going through a depression of 1893 and the effects of it still in 1898. And as Gresham stated, that there were symptoms of a revolution evident in the 1890s in this country. And so the suggestion that a war may have been a healthy distraction. And yes, the gold bugs did mention the fact that it would be nice to secure foreign markets for our surplus goods at this point as well. So those have been mentioned as revisionist interpretations, and also the lobbyist thesis that certain lobbyist groups really pushed for war for ulterior reasons. And but the people in the countries themselves, yes, you had the juntas in Florida and in New York trying to gain American sympathy for the Free Cuba cause. But when you look at the leaders, especially Aguinaldo in the Philippines and Martí as well in Cuba, kind of the Jefferson of the Cuban revolutionary movement, you find a lot of hesitance on their part to enlist our help. And for good reason, right? Afraid that in inviting the American lion in to help against the Spanish, that we may not want to leave when all was said and done after we've kicked the Spanish out. And that seemed to be pretty foreboding in the Philippines, especially. So keep that in mind with option D on number two, okay? And with number four, I meant to convey the fact that U.S. did have naval technological superiority to the Spanish, and especially in Cuba, the Spanish did not fight very wisely. They had a large number of forces, and they organized. They didn't disseminate them in a way, in hindsight, that was very effective in fighting. So at any given time, they didn't use their superior numbers. They didn't have superior numbers against us, except for bottling themselves up in Santiago de Cuba, that city in Cuba. And we ended up talking them into peace, and we didn't even have to fight in the one area where we were greatly outnumbered by Spanish forces. So those are all important to note. So take a good look at option B with number four. All right. With number six, I definitely intended to convey the point. It may not be in the handout, that Walter Lefebvre does do revisionist history of the U.S. A lot of the selection of facts, his organization of those facts, his presentation of those facts really are indicting against the U.S. Oftentimes they kind of hint of a plutocracy, if you will. And so definitely revisionist, his history. If you want to get the dirt, I would say, on America, pertaining to Latin America, especially with our foreign policy being very friendly to big corporations, using kind of Machiavellian means to get the Panamanian Canal, etc. Look up Mr. Lefebvre, any number of his books. All right. And then number 7, I meant to embody James G. Blaine with all of those points. Okay, as you see, let me scroll down on number 7. I intended indeed to convey that fact that he was depicted in class subjectively as an embodiment of the power of ideas when held by men in positions of high power. So we talked about those dangerous ideas that were percolating in the 1890s on number 1 on that assignment of overseas imperialism, of America's increasing willingness to engage in aggressive geopolitics. Absolutely. He was pretty aggressive as a Secretary of State, and a Marxist accusation of governments dangerously intertwining foreign policy with the interests of big business. I think so indeed in reading of James G. Blaine. And he certainly was not alone, but I felt like he embodied all of those. And so I felt like that was worth noting for the test. All right. And remember, with Taft's dollar diplomacy, he didn't bother going to brinkmanship. Brinkmanship is threatening war to achieve diplomatic means. And he boasted that that wasn't necessary, that the almighty dollar could sway Latin American countries in our direction, in a friendly direction. So number 8 is certainly not true. Then moving on, number 11, with me subjectively, from what I've read, okay, and like give you an example of such, is Captive Paradise: A History of Hawaii by James Haley, Haley. Very interesting book. It starts off oftentimes as the 3 or 4 books that I've read on American history in Hawaii. It starts off almost court-like in depicting well-meaning missionaries in the 1820s trying to spread the gospel to the Hawaiian people, and then it devolves from that point to the second and third generation by the 1870s and 1880s, where it becomes more of a revisionist story. If you'll bear with me here, let me just show you a brief outline. I don't want to go too long on this because you're doing the entire test, and this is just one question. But look at some of the notes I have here. Kamehameha the First is oftentimes depicted as a bit ruthless, but he kind of puts modern Hawaii in its present unified form, because it was very politically and militarily decentralized before him in the 1790s through the 18 teens. But then Christianity makes a big impact in the 1820s. Hiram Bingham, and I put a couple names here: Amos Cook, Samuel Castle, Asa Thurston. When you look at those names, those last names are going to become important later on. Castle and Cook with sugar, and later Lauren Thurston with annexation to the United States. Let's see here. Yeah, like I said, I don't know how much I want to get into this, but it's very interesting. I'm going to butcher these names. Keupuolani was converted. Kapiolani did a very religious demonstration. She went down into a lava bed where it was pronounced by the religious priests that she would be killed by the deity Pele for her affront. And she did it in the name of Christianity, and she came out unscathed. And between her and Keupuolani, they did a lot to take away the structure of the old religious kapu system of the Polynesian gods. It did involve human sacrifice and sex. And so when the missionaries came there was a lot that they had to frown upon and be frightened by. And so by the 1830s, they're going to institute different laws under a friendly co-regent queen. Oftentimes the kings, Kamehameha II and Kamehameha III, are depicted in the popular primary sources as being a bit aloof and almost kind of weak. compared to their namesake Kamehameha I, prone to alcoholism and so forth. But then King Kalakaua, when he instituted the bayonet constitution, that's where it seemed like the Haole, Haole, the white-skinned, I think it literally means without breath because they couldn't speak the Polynesian language, but the white folk, namely Americans, but also Englishmen, Russians, etc., but mainly American, Haole, took charge of the government. And it doesn't look good in the sources. It leans toward a revisionist interpretation of American manipulation. And so the saying is that the first generation meant well in converting the Polynesian people, but their sons and grandsons had sugar and economics and power more on their agenda. And Queen Liliuokalani came in and tried to return to the old Polynesian ways, with the exception of Christianity. She embraced Christianity, but she tried to return to the Polynesian form of government and take away the republic that was under Kalakaua. And the republic was supposedly a puppet republic. Property qualifications for citizenship were so high that virtually only the Haole were citizens. The cabinet had to approve everything of Kalakaua, and they could not be removed but by their own consent. And of course, they were a Haole cadre of men. And Lauren Thurston was largely behind this with his Hawaiian League and pushes for American annexation. And he went to meet with Benjamin Harrison, the president. The president would not go so far as overtly meet with him, but he sent a man to Lauren Thurston and told him that he has a sympathetic American government on his side. And so the Secretary of the Navy, Benjamin Tracy, the Ambassador Stevens to Hawaii were both annexationists. They wanted to annex the Hawaiian Islands to the United States. And they used it as pretext when Liliuokalani tried to arrest the leaders, the leading 13 members of the Hawaiian League. They brought in American Marines to protect American lives, liberty, and property. And so she thought that she told her people not to fight. She didn't want bloodshed. She thought, especially because she had become Christian, that the American government would reason with her and put her back on the throne. And it never happened. It's a sad story. And so at any rate, that's a real quick, not very fair, but like I said, we're covering an entire test today. So I intended that one to be absolutely me subjectively, a revisionist interpretation to Hawaiian takeover, American takeover of the Hawaiian Islands. Okay. And then I'm going to leave it up. I'm going to ask you guys if you have specific questions, but let me finish the ones that I've, if you would, the ones where I felt, okay, I definitely want to cover this one. Number 18 is, remember, I make the argument that revisionists contend that the settlement workers, however well-intentioned and altruistic a lot of their services were, that there is the story. There was a story of a young woman at this time, and her biography, her autobiography, became famous as a Russian immigrant, Jewish immigrant girl, and it basically shows how there was a lot of pressure put upon the new immigrants to become very WASP-like, to become evangelical Christian, and to develop a middle class value system and lifestyle, etc. And that created conflict between the first generation of immigrants and their children, who they were largely trying to convert and bring in to assimilation into white WASP American middle class culture. And so that's important to remember on number 18. Okay. And then in addition to that, I'm going down to number 28, which I'm not sure if I really covered. But which of the following is false concerning the American doughboys experience in World War I? Black American soldiers often received a taste of better treatment when fighting with the French. On virtually any documentary you watch or book you read, they will state that as true. Conservative progressive regulations against immorality and drunkenness stifled the soldiers' experience. The common interpretation is that attempt failed, that our American doughboys lost their innocence in France during World War I, that the progressive moral codes under the Secretary of Navy, Josephus Daniels, largely failed. So that's the one that doesn't fit. Friction arising between French leadership. There was a guy named Ferdinand Foch, Foch, and he was at the Argonne and other areas of fighting, was putting a lot of American doughboys in harm's way. And there was resentment by General John J. Pershing and other Americans, officers who felt like the French were kind of discarding American soldiers first into the most dangerous areas, almost resentfully because we took so long to enter the war. Friction arising between American officers and regulars, absolutely. The two wars where I find the most primary source evidence for this in American history, to me personally, are arguably World War I and Vietnam. And so you find a lot of that evidence for that type of friction during World War I. And then American numbers alone may have helped influence the Germans to surrender. I think so. You have a quote from Erich Ludendorff of Germany himself, one of the two military commanders of the German army and government during wartime, state just as such. All right. So I wanted to cover number 28 as well. And then with number 32.
I have a question.
Sure.
So didn't it say that armistice not surrender?
I'm sorry?
So was it that the American numbers alone helped influence Germans not to armistice?
Yes. Yeah, so the armistice turned into a peace at Versailles, right? And so, like I said,
surrender.
So maybe surrender wasn't a good, are you saying that surrender maybe is not historically accurate verb that I put there? Because remember they agreed to the armistice on 11/11, right?
Okay.
And but at Versailles, even though we didn't sign Versailles, we did it separately. They had to capitulate. They had to formally surrender at the Versailles Treaty. And like I said, there are quotes from Ludendorff and Hindenburg, both their leaders at the time, that American numbers helped influence them to surrender at Versailles. Sorry, Jaden, you're really coming.
Yeah, so basically it wasn't really a surrender, it's more of an armistice.
Yes, it was more of an armistice. Yeah. So maybe that's a little bit of a misnomer on my part. I apologize.
B would be wrong.
So no,
okay. Would you say that number B correct on question 27 would
on question 27?
Okay.
Yeah, 27 is supposed to have true or false. It will under quizzes. And absolutely, 27 was intended to be true on the last number of the World War I handout, right? That was precisely the thesis that he felt as if circumstances beyond his control was compelling him to violate his own rhetoric.
Derek, so you would
I'm in 28, so would
B?
So yes, so 28, I apologize, like if I shouldn't have used the term surrender, but that is intended to be true. And so in looking for the one that's false, you want to choose B for 28. Yeah, B was the option that I intended to convey as false.
Thank you.
No problem. Sorry about that. Was that your question? Okay, good, Laura. Okay, so yeah, sorry about that. Going down to number 32, all of those are meant to be true, with the exception of B, right? According to Alan Brinkley in our textbook, most women did not yet become economically independent. That's too strong of a statement. So B as in boy is the one that does not fit on number 32. Okay. And then number 33, I hope that I conveyed such. I know I do when I lecture on the topic, is to me subjectively, I look at option A as an apple, prohibition as having attained limited success. Nevertheless, it was depicted as nearly impossible to enforce and tied in class to a mass deviance image of the Roaring Twenties and to the sociological question of legislating morality. All right, so that's what I intended on number 33. I don't know how well that point was made in my introduction. So that's why I wanted to make sure that I go over that one as well. And then with 37, I don't think that I'm not sure if I conveyed the point in writing, but I intended to on the lecture is look at the first option. The instructor argued that it should have involved the legal issues of authority over curriculum and goals and limitations regarding academic liberty, but that was not indeed what was focused upon. It became, like option B, a very circus-like, turned into a quasi-holy war. The press did depict the forces against evolutionary theory taught in biological classes as backward. And so the one that does not fit is A, as an apple. So I wanted to make sure that I conveyed that. Remember the last three, you're getting them on your own from the textbook. So those are the ones that I wasn't sure that could be found from the argumentative assignments, just straight from reading them. But are there any other questions? Those are the ones that I felt were the most uncertain regarding their applicability to the writings.
I have a question. So about the Harlem Renaissance,
Sure.
Josephine Baker, would it be that France was more ahead of accepting Black Americans
Absolutely. So yeah,
and discrimination?
That's right. So yeah, as I mentioned, I meant to convey the opposite of what you see there, right? On number 35, is that to me, when I look at her biography, I see it as the antithesis of what I wrote down on number 35, that it showed the limitations of American acceptance of African Americans and African American culture. With her, as you said it yourself, Jaden, her disgust and kind of with America in her contrast between France and the United States, and how much better of a reception and tolerance she received in France than she did here.
Okay. And I have one more question.
Sure.
So on number 31, I understand kind of like everything on it except for the part that says often associated with non-WASP minorities.
Yes.
What would that mean?
Don't be thrown off by that. But remember, I'm saying just jazz culture, right?
Yeah.
That not all of that, and I hope that that's clear enough for all my students. The ... it only is referring to jazz culture, not everything else. They didn't tie consumerism per se, secularism, although the KKK did, with a broad brush of the paintbrush. I'm referring only to jazz culture there. And absolutely, jazz culture was associated with African American culture, with non white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture, right? That's what WASP is, that acronym. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, 31 I
Thank
intended
you.
to be true.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome, Jaden, anytime. All right. So, anyone else? Anyone else? Like I said, I could be overlooking something, but I feel like the rest of them can be discerned from your argumentative and other assignments. But I could be overlooking something. So by all means, if anyone else has a question on a specific question, please shoot.
Derek, I kind of have a question on number 4. I'm in between B and C.
Sure.
And we went over it. Can you explain it just a little bit more?
Sure. With C, right? Oftentimes it is not depicted in that way, as far as the Puerto Rican insurgents and the Filipino insurgents. Oftentimes it's depicted as them being at very best, ambivalent about in their reception of American soldiers there to help fight them. Because remember, Puerto Rico accepted the autonomy decrees from Spain. They accepted a compromise with Spain, and so they didn't ask for our help. And Emilio Aguinaldo and those of the Katipunan organization, they were very reserved in accepting American help. So C, I definitely meant to be incorrect. And with B, I'm mainly looking at Cuba. Most of the fighting occurred in Cuba in the Spanish-American War. And I'm going from a book called Empire by Default by Ivan Muzikant. And that was his thesis, basically, is that the U.S. Benefited from technological superiority and from poor Spanish decisions from their high command. As the example I mentioned, bottling themselves up in Santiago de Cuba, and at any given point, El Cañe, Las Guasimas, Kettle, the Battle of Kettle Hill and San Juan Hill, etc. We almost never fought superior numbers, even though there were more Spanish soldiers on the island than there were Americans. They didn't allocate their sources very effectively.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
So on number 9, it says, which of the following is false regarding the Platt Amendment?
Yes.
We didn't really learn much about that one, so we're a little confused on it. We think that it's like number C, but I'm not sure.
Yes, you would have inferred correctly with C, because the first two options, that's what the Platt Amendment was all about. We from Cuba, when we won the Spanish-American War by the end of the summer of 1898 to 1902, for 4 years we occupied Cuba, and then by virtue of the Teller Amendment, Teller, we had already promised that we weren't going to stay. But this was kind of our caveat, our condition, is we said, okay, we're leaving here 4 years later, but by virtue of the Oliver Platt Amendment, we reserve the right to intervene in Cuban affairs in the future in the name of stability or for America's self-interest. So that's absolutely true. And yeah, I'm sorry if I didn't convey that on the argumentative handout. And then also it did oblige Cuba to lease I put it in quotations because it's subjective as far as us leasing it. We pretty much controlled it, and we didn't give them a say. And so we leased technically Guantanamo Bay from Cuba as a military base as well. And it absolutely was a source of great criticism in Cuban political discourse later on. Matter of fact, many years later, when Fidel Castro in '59 succeeds in his revolution against Batista, he is going to repudiate the Platt Amendment immediately. And so just that many years later, from 1902 to 1949, it still was upmost in Cuban minds as far as their resentment of it.
Okay. Thank you. I have one more question. So on number 10, we were on that one. We know that the war started before President Roosevelt was in office, but then we know that he visited the islands, but we don't know if that one, we're kind of confused and unclear on that one. So I'm just a little confused.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Technically,
that
McKinley,
one.
absolutely. Technically, McKinley began the anti-insurrectionary, as he called it, fight in the Philippines. But when he was assassinated, Roosevelt did not change policy. So he also, because it would take, right, at least 4 years for us to thwart it. So he did also intervene, or at least promote. Yeah, and that's a good point. He intervened in Cuba. Well, we already intervened. Let's see here, during an insurrection and military. Yeah, and he militarily thwarted the insurrection of the Filipinos. So those technically both are true with option D. I think you read about option E in the handout, that he endorsed the Panamanian independence movement from Colombia. And the first thing they did was issue us a contract to construct an Isthmian or Panamanian canal. You know about his corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. And I hope that I made it clear that although he was Christian, he did imbibe a lot of the dangerous ideas of social Darwinism and so forth of his time period, as evident in his words as well as in his actions. But notice on option C, they did not yet offer a plebiscite to the Puerto Rican people, and he certainly didn't grant them their independence. They're not independent to this day. They're still an incorporated territory under the United States.
So he was the first president to visit?
I'm, you know what? I should know that, and I'm not aware of that, actually. Jaden, I apologize. You're talking about Puerto Rico?
Yeah.
Yeah, I should know that, and I don't. I apologize. But just remember, you're looking for the one that is false. And so I would take a long look at option C. He certainly didn't let Puerto Rico free.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Anyone else? Any other specific question you're not certain, you don't feel confident about?
Hey, Derek, I just had a question. It's not exactly about test, but are we gonna be allowed to replay this video?
Yes. Yeah. I'll post this as usual.
I just want to go over some of the information that we're talking about one more time as a review.
Of course, Kevin. I'd be happy to do that.
All right, because there's a lot of information.
It is. Yeah, we're covering overseas imperialism, the progressive movement, Woodrow Wilson and his idealism in World War I, and the Roaring '20s. That's a lot. It is. I understand that, and I empathize. And also, no, please remember that you don't get multiple submissions either. But I also definitely did not put a time limit. I don't know if there's a time by which I'm not familiar with Canvas from the venue of a student, as far as it checking you out after a certain amount of time. But if it does, that certainly is not my doing, because if it were up to me, I would certainly have no time limit and let you take your sweet time in submitting your answers this week.
I have one more question.
Sure, Jaden.
So, could you discuss a little bit about Woodrow Wilson and his opinion on Whig and Central Powers?
Yeah. With number one, right on that handout, is that according to Richard Hofstadter, he was very impressed with with England. He thought that England was the embodiment of what government ought to do, and that is gradually, without revolution, without tumult and bloodshed, etc., gradually democratize, become more and more democratic, more and more representative of the people, granting more rights and more opportunities of political participation to more and more people within the country, right? And so he was impressed by that. So when he looked at the Central Powers, according to his Whig standards, right, as an academic, the Central Powers were archaic. They were from a bygone era. They still had not czars, that'd be the exception, right? Because there's actually a czar on the Triple Entente side. But they had emperors still, right? A Kaiser or an emperor. Their legislators were not representative of the people as far as direct representation of all the people that they were over. The separation of powers between military and civil government was not completed in his estimation, and there was too much power given over to the military in each of those countries. His idea of self-determination was largely contradicted by them, in that they took over a lot of different ethnic groups against their will. And so hence, one Whig standard after another, as far as saying, okay, I want direct representation for the people and a hegemonic or dominating legislator. Well, he doesn't see that in any of the Central Powers. I want a written constitution, and I want public suffrage for everybody, the right to run for office and vote, etc. Well, he would say, I don't see that either amongst the Central Powers. And I want a clear civil control over the military, and not giving much of a free rein to the military. But instead, you have old school emperors who have unilateral sway as commander-in-chiefs outside of time of war, but even during time of peace, to raise the army, to send it to go fight, right, etc. And so one Whig standard after another was not met by the Central Powers, according to Richard Hofstadter. And so because of his Whig preferences, he was disgusted with the Central Powers, supposedly, and he was much more impressed with England and France, and hence was never truly neutral, but almost secretly wanted us to get involved to ensure that the good guys won, that the more democratic, side, if you will, would prevail.
Okay. So would that mean that Woodrow Wilson would be more confrontational, even leading to war?
Absolutely. And that's evident, right, with his two, one or two, I can't recall, his ultimatum, at least one, to the German nation concerning the U-boats and the unrestricted submarine warfare. He gave no such ultimatum to the English when they were violating our neutral rights as a trading nation as well. And for that reason, and for others, William Jennings Bryan, as his Secretary of the Secretary of State, resigned, because he could see that Wilson was itching for a fight against Germany. and not truly neutral. Yeah,
Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome, as always. All right, so anyone else?
Thanks for just posting all the stuff really early so we could all look at it.
You're very welcome, Jaden. I really enjoyed this class, and I anything I could do to help out your journey, I enjoy doing it. I really do. Okay, and then lastly, remember with number 13, right? Is that they were for being lenient toward poor immigrants and children because they had a sociological take on crime, right? That poverty bred crime. And so they wanted to be more lenient, not more strict against poor and young lawbreakers. Okay, so if that's it, we'll go ahead and call it a meeting, okay? And you guys be sure to get it done before Halloween, and don't put undue stress on yourselves, but yet you do have the full week as usual. And make sure you're very deliberate with your answers, okay? As you get one submission. And needless to say, I hope and pretty much expect that you guys are going to do pretty well. And remember, this is only one of 16 assignments when you add it to the 13 assignments, the 3 tests, right? This is only one of 16 assignments that is 50 points. So don't put undue stress on yourself. Just do your best, and that's all you can do.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you,
welcome,
Derek.
Jaden.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you, Julie. All right, so you guys have a great week. Canvas, message me if you have any questions or concerns, and I will try to post this this video by tonight.
All right, thank you, Derek. I appreciate it.
You're
Thank you,
welcome,
Derek.
Kevin.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jaden. You guys have a good week, okay?
Thank you.
All right.